Right now, let's get a little bit aesthetic, shall we? I love the way this movie is shot. I love the energy of it. I love the handheld feel of it. And you're kind of seeing that aesthetic in action right now here in a nice way. Part of shooting a movie this fast was embracing the ragged edges of what I call this jazzier style than I've ever employed before as a filmmaker. My films have tended to be rather painterly and very carefully thought out and very carefully shot. Well, this film was an opportunity for me to throw all that out the window and put aside all my technique that I developed and just completely embrace a different way of doing things, something that was very guerrilla filmmaking in its nature and very handheld, almost a little bit of a documentary style. It's the kind of thing that I've never done before. And I knew we had to do that in order to make the movie on the schedule and the budget that we had. And it worked out really fantastically. The lighting in this scene is really interesting because pretty much, I mean, there's a little pockets of light that were set, but mostly a lot of this scene was lit by flashlights, either that the actors were holding. You can see they're flashing lights in each other's faces. That was really part of the reality of the scene. Down below frame, there's some electricians bouncing flashlights off of white cards, etc., to kick up a little bit of extra light. But we wanted to do this in a very kind of loose way and see what happened, see what the flashlights gave us. And it really gave us a great look because it really feels real. And it was in pursuit of that documentary kind of feel that we were trying to get into the movie, that sort of grainy, it's happening now kind of texture. This is a great time, I think, to shift into the subject of camera work. The whole technique of how this film was shot was a very big departure for me. People who know my previous work know that my camera work tends to be very steady, very thought out in advance, very carefully placed camera movements, very carefully placed frames. As I said before, earlier in the commentary, I wanted to throw all that technique out. I think it's great to, on occasion, just shake it up. Just shake up everything that you know and try on a whole different way of doing something, try on a whole different suit of clothes. And you'll notice what a documentary kind of handheld, ragged, and at times aggressive style of camera work this is. Now, I have to bring up Ron Schmidt, who is my cinematographer. You have to have a DP who really knows how to light for this kind of stuff. Start there, and you really need to have some brilliant camera operators. In this case, Billy Gearhart and Richard Cantu, and I cannot praise them enough or stress highly enough how important they were to the process of making this movie. Now here I'll get back into the camera work. As I was saying, you need fantastic camera operators for this roving style of camera work where it seems to be finding moments rather than predetermining them, where things are happening and you feel like the lens is just kind of staying with it barely, maybe even one step behind. It's that documentary thing. Billy Gearhart, Richie Cantu are brilliant. It's all improvised camera work. Unlike my previous films, where I would plan very carefully in advance, block actors and camera very carefully in rehearsals, and we would make those camera moves and shoot that coverage specifically as I had pre-planned. This was a completely different technique, a completely different approach, all improvised camera work. I would go in there, I'd block the actors, we'd start rehearsing. In fact, we'd start rehearsing with cameras rolling just to see what kind of ragged magic we could maybe grab. And within a few takes, the scene would start to dial in, the actors would start to dial in, and the cameras would start to figure out what they were doing. And it was all improvised. And I would watch what Richie and Billy were doing on my monitors. They each had a monitor. So I was watching both cameras at the same time, what they were doing, and seeing how they were finding the scene, how they were discovering the scene. And man, I love that approach. It hung my sort of directorial visual style more on an in-the-moment, rather brilliantly executed set of cameramen who were very versed in this style, rather than any amount of pre-planning that I had done. And it was really liberating and really fun to work this way for a change. I think it requires a certain amount of confidence to give yourself over to it as a director, especially if you're a bit of a control freak.
Come on now.
I am a little bit. And to say goodbye to control freak and say hello to, okay, in the moment, let's go, let the cameraman find it, improvise this stuff. And in between takes, I would go in and I would suggest something to Billy or Richie. Just as I would make adjustments or suggestions to actors, I would go in and do the same thing with the camera. I'd say, okay, that was good, but you missed this little moment over here, and have you considered maybe just dropping here? A little more emphasis on this, a little less on that. And boom, we'd be rolling again immediately. And watching these takes happening almost in real time, I did a little bit of playback, but not that much and not nearly as much as I normally do. I'm not examining every shot in playback. We didn't have time. We had a 6-week shoot. We had to get through it. So mostly in real time, I'm judging what these guys are doing and collaborating with them and seeing the marvelous stuff that they're coming up with. And I dug that. I really did.
I think the actors did too, because they had to embrace it. I think they were a little thrown at first, but once they got used to it, the fact that a camera could bump into them at any moment or suddenly it was their closest and they didn't know.
Yes.
I heard a few of them say it was the closest thing to theater that they had ever done on film.
Yeah, well, you cannot, as an actor, phone it in any given take. You can't just say, okay, well, it's a big wide shot, they're on my back, and, I don't have to be on completely. They had to be on every single take because they never knew where that camera was going to be. That camera could suddenly come into a massive close-up, and they didn't see it coming from behind their shoulder, or the lens would zoom in from across the room. They don't know they're being featured in the shot, but the camera's across the room. So they never knew where that camera was going to be or what it was going to be getting. And yes, it threw some of them at first. Andre was very used to it because he'd been doing Homicide, Life on the Streets, the TV show, for a long time. And Tom really got into it right off the bat. Some of the other actors were a little thrown at first, but everybody wound up embracing it because it was just as liberating for them too. And there was none of this holding back stuff. And I think actors want to be challenged and they really want to be on. So we all got into the style of it.
Keep it loose.
And here are my shots of these people vanishing into the mist, which are right out of Steven Spielberg's Amazing Stories episode. You can't help but be derivative when you have people walking off into a mist. It reminds me of half the movies Steven Spielberg ever directed. This scene was so much fun to do. This was, would you say, Denise, the most fun I had on the set?
Oh, no question, the most fun you had on set.
This day was wonderful because to shoot this, it's not something you can really direct from the monitors. I couldn't be directing everybody in the rope and what was going on. So I got out there myself. I'm actually, the creature in the mist is me and some grips and some effects guys. And I had the microphone on, and I was shouting directions, and we were basically playing tug of war with Tom and the other actors here. And we had a gizmo to make it move really fast, and I would be shouting out, and they wouldn't be hearing me half the time because there was so much going on. We had Daryl out there with a pole to raise it into the air. So all these cues I was shouting out as we were playing tug of war, and it was one of those moments where filmmaking becomes fun and childlike, and I loved it. And I would yell, okay, everybody fall down, and they would all fall down. And what delighted me, I mean, we shot this so quickly, but the sequence winds up being a pretty intense, scary sequence. Once you add certain sound effects, our sound folks did a wonderful job with the rope, whizzing and everything like that. And you let people use their imaginations, and you see these wonderful actors doing their jobs, and it winds up being a very intense, scary, old-school kind of scene. It's very mysterious. And what you don't see is us outside and Greg Nicotero smearing the blood on the rope as it's coming back in with his rubber gloves. And here's Brian's last little moment, or at least part of Brian's last little moment in the movie. That's actually a construct, again, from Greg and K&B with the guts hanging out. Anyway, this was really, I think, about the most fun I had. And really my most fun day of shooting. You can see all that silliness on the documentary that we have on the DVD supplements. Konstantin Nasser, who was our documentary filmmaker, captured it brilliantly, so check it out.
Do you see? Now do you believe?
Now, there's a little scene coming up here right after this that I added to the movie on the fly. It's this scene where Tom is asking about the work lights, and we see that Jim and Myron have actually been rigging them up to some batteries that we figure were back on the loading dock somewhere. I realized as we were shooting, as we were getting into some of this night stuff, we have a supermarket without any power in it, and we had a big extended action scene coming up here, all at night, where creatures get into the store, and I thought, we really are asking for trouble if we don't have some kind of light source. And I thought it might be very cool also to have work lights on so that some of that light could be very glary and a little harsh, and it'll kind of reinforce that documentary feel. So I came up with the idea one night to add these work lights, just to justify using light wherever we wanted to, just to give Ron the additional tools so that we weren't having to do super careful lighting in the scene that's coming up. I was kind of delighted with how it turned out. I thought it was a really pretty convincing earthquake, considering how low budget we were. And the audiences who were watching it, I remember in the theater, seemed pretty convinced too. So I was very pleased about that. One of the fun things about having shot that scene is my production sound mixer, Paul Ledford, came up to me before we shot this sequence, and he said, you know, I have this huge earthquake rumble recording. Would you like me to bring in some giant bass speakers and actually play this sound effect on the set for everybody who's supposed to react to it? And I said, that's a great idea, but let's not tell them we're going to do it. So that really was the first take. We pretty much only did one take. We did a few other little pickup shots, but kind of for the main body of the earthquake, that was really a one-take deal. And when it started, we cued it with that giant earthquake rumble, and it was a shocking sound on the set. Everybody jumped, and everybody really got into it. I think they really enjoyed being surprised and a little scared by that sound on the set. It really added some energy to it, and it really, I think, helped sell it.